Visit RainyRoadMedia.com for my self-published work and to stay informed about future projects. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you're an aspiring writer like me, you may have heard how critical it is for your stories to have a compelling opening. If the story doesn't immediately hook readers, it can get tossed out. So I thought an interesting experiment would be to put published books to this test. I'll read the first 4 pages, and you'll decide if the story is worth continuing. So, let's start reading the first 4 pages of The Gunslinger, The Dark Tower, Part 1 by Stephen King. This is the revised and expanded edition. Chapter 1, The Gunslinger. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. The desert was the apotheosis of all deserts, huge, standing to the sky for what looked like eternity in all directions. It was white and blinding and waterless, and without feature, save for the faint cloudy haze of the mountains which sketched themselves on the horizon, and the devil grass which brought sweet dreams, nightmares, death. An occasional tombstone sign pointed the way. For once the drifted track that cut its way through the thick crust of alkali had been a highway. Coaches and buckers had followed it. The world had moved on since then. The world had emptied. The gunslinger had been struck by a momentary dizziness, a kind of yawing sensation that made the entire world seem ephemeral, almost a thing that could be looked through. It passed, and, like the world upon whose hide he walked, he moved on. He passed the miles stolidly, not hurrying, not loafing. A hide water bag was slung around his middle like a bloated sausage. It was almost full. He had progressed through the kef over many years, and had reached perhaps the 5th level. Had he been a manny holy man, he might not have even been thirsty. He could have watched his own body dehydrate with clinical, detached attention, watering its crevices and dark inner hollows only when his logic told him it must be done. He was not a manny, however, nor a follower of the man-Jesus, and considered himself in no way holy. He was just an ordinary pilgrim, in other words, and all he could say with real certainty was that he was thirsty, and even so he had no particular urge to drink. In a vague way, all this pleased him. It was what the country required. It was a thirsty country, and he had in his long life been nothing if not adaptable. Below the water bag were his guns, carefully weighted to his hands. A plate had been added to each when they had come to him from his father, who had been lighter and not so tall. The 2 belts crisscrossed above his crotch. The holsters were oiled too deeply for even this Philistine sun to crack. The 2 belts crisscrossed above his crotch. The holsters were oiled too deeply for even this Philistine sun to crack. The stocks of the guns were sandalwood, yellow, and finely grained. Rawhide tie-downs held the holsters loosely to his thighs, and they swung a bit with his step. They had rubbed away the bluing of his jeans and thinned the cloth in a pair of arcs that looked almost like smiles. The brass casings of the cartridges looped into the gun belts, heliographed in the sun. There were fewer now. The leather made subtle creaking noises. His shirt, the no color of rain or dust, was open at the throat, with a rawhide thong dangling loosely in hand-punched eyelets. His hat was gone. So was the horn he had once carried. Gone for years, that horn, spilled from the hand of a dying friend, and he missed them both. He breasted a gently rising dune, although there was no sand here. The desert was hardpan, and even the harsh winds that blew when dark came raised only an aggravating harsh dust like scouring powder, and saw the kicked remains of a tiny campfire on the lee side, the side the sun would quit earliest. Small signs like this, once more affirming the man in black's possible humanity, never failed to please him. His lips stretched in the pitted, flaked remains of his face. The grin was gruesome, painful. He squatted. His quarry had burned the devil grass, of course. It was the only thing out here that would burn. It burned with a greasy, flat light, and it burned slow. Border dwellers had told him that devils lived even in the flames. They burned it, but would not look into the light. They said the devils hypnotized, beckoned, would eventually draw the one who looked into the fires, and the next man foolish enough to look into the fire might see you. The burned grass was crisscrossed in the now familiar ideographic pattern and crumbled to gray senselessness before the gunslinger's prodding hand. There was nothing in the remains but a charred scrap of bacon, which he ate thoughtfully. It had always been this way. The gunslinger had followed the man in black across the desert for 2 months now, across the endless, screamingly monotonous purgatorial wastes, and had yet to find spoor other than the hygienic sterile ideographs of the man in black's campfires. He had not found a can, a bottle, or a water bag. The gunslinger had left 4 of those behind, like dead snakeskins. He hadn't found any dung. He assumed the man in black buried it. Perhaps the campfires were a message, spelled out one great letter at a time. Keep your distance, partner, it might say, or the end draweth nigh, or maybe even come and get me. It didn't matter what they said or didn't say. He had no interest in messages, if messages they were. What mattered was that these remains were as cold as all the others. Yet he had gained. He knew he was closer, but did not know how he knew. A kind of smell, perhaps. That didn't matter either. He would keep going until something changed, and if nothing changed, he would keep going anyway. There would be water if God willed it, the old-timer said. Water if God willed it, even in the desert. The gunslinger stood up, brushing his hands. So, what do you think? Based on those first 4 pages, would you keep reading? Comment below, and like and subscribe if it's not too much trouble. Until next time.